Everything is gone. The farm is bankrupt.
How could you let this happen?
What about the money I loaned you?
Dad, are you safe?
Dad, have you eaten? What do you need? Walter, we have to go to the clinic, now.
It's pneumonia, Walter. You need rest.
I have pneumonia.
Do you still own the North 40 acres?
The farm never went bankrupt. You lied to us!
You tested us?
I wanted to know who would stay when I had nothing left to give.
Claire drove 3 hours every week for 9 months. She never asked about money, she only asked if I was lonely. I didn't pass a test, I just showed up.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to continue the story. At Black Voice Stories, every story reveals a deeper truth about life, courage, and humanity. Subscribe now, and let's continue this incredible journey together.
Walter Callahan owned 600 acres of bottomland in Harlan County, Iowa, 3 grain elevators along Route 34, and a financial portfolio that would have made every man at the First Methodist Church quietly uncomfortable if they had known the numbers. He drove a 12-year-old Ford F-250 with mud on the running boards. He wore the same Carhartt jacket from October through April. He paid his debts on the first of the month, shook hands like he meant it, and had not once in 49 years of farming asked another man for anything he was not prepared to offer in return. But none of that mattered after Dorothy died. Dorothy Callahan, born Dorothy Jean Whitfield, passed on a Tuesday morning in late November at 6:43 a.m. in the bedroom where she and Walter had slept for 31 years. She had been sick for 11 months, pancreatic cancer, the aggressive kind that does not negotiate. Walter had held her hand through all of it, through the gray weeks of chemotherapy and the raw, burning indignity of radiation, through the nights when the pain medication stopped working, and the only thing left to do was sit beside her and be present. He sat, he was present. He held her hand until she stopped needing him to hold it. He was 71 years old when she died. He had built everything he owned for her. Not in the sentimental way people mean at funerals when the living suddenly remember the dead as perfect. He had built it literally, with his hands and her steady judgment beside him. They had started with 80 acres, a broken-down tractor, and a farmhouse that listed to the east when the wind came up hard from Kansas. Dorothy had not plaintive bacon cold. She had painted it instead. She had planted a vegetable garden along the south wall the first spring they lived there, and she had kept that garden for 30 years, adding to it every season the way other women add rooms to a house. They had expanded the acreage twice in the 1990s. They had built the first grain elevator in 1993, and the second in 1999, and the third in 2004, the year their youngest daughter, Claire, graduated from high school. Dorothy had managed the farm's books from a desk in the corner of the kitchen, surrounded by seed catalogs and ledgers, and the small ceramic rooster Walter had brought her from the Iowa State Fair the year they were first married. Rooster sat on the corner of her desk for the rest of her life. They raised 4 children in that farmhouse. Nathan came first, broad-shouldered and restless, always wanting something bigger than what the county could offer. Ate a strip of bacon cold, left at 19, went to college in Chicago, earned a business degree, and opened a commercial real estate brokerage that did well enough to afford him certain opinions about how his parents should have managed their money. He called on holidays and birthdays. He called when he had questions about the farm's assessed value. Sylvia arrived 2 years after Nathan, sharper than her brother in ways that sometimes cut the people she loved. She became a marketing director for a healthcare company in Minneapolis, married twice, and had settled into a version of competence that left very little room for things she found inconvenient, including, increasingly, her father. Marcus was the third child, quieter than the first 2, better with engines than with people. He opened an auto body shop in Ames, married a woman named Carla, and had 2 kids and a mortgage that was always a little tighter than it needed to be. He came to the farm several times a year. He always needed something when he came. Claire was the youngest and the one who had stayed closest to home. She taught 4th grade at an elementary school in Cedar Falls, 47 miles from the farm. She had married a man named Ben Osterhaus, a mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a genuine laugh. She had called home every Sunday evening at 6 p.m. for 15 years without missing a single week. Dorothy had been the thread that held them together. She remembered every birthday without a calendar. She organized Thanksgiving. She knew which child was struggling before they said so. Nathan's brokerage had a bad quarter in 2011. Dorothy drove to Chicago with a cooler of food and sat in his kitchen until he talked about it. When Sylvia's second marriage ended, Dorothy flew to Minneapolis and stayed 10 days. When Marcus needed $14,000 to keep the shop from closing, Dorothy convinced Walter to write the check in a way that did not make Marcus feel small about asking. Walter provided, Dorothy connected. That was the arrangement. It worked for 31 years. Then Dorothy got sick, and the arrangement ended, and Walter learned something about his children that Dorothy had. In the quiet way, she knew things probably already known. She fought for 11 months. Through all of it, the children came, but not equally. Nathan flew in twice, both times for less than 48 hours, both times leaving with the look of a man who had performed a duty. Sylvia came once at Christmas and spent the visit mostly on her phone in the guest room with the door closed and her voice low and professional. Marcus stopped by when he happened to be in the area, never quite sitting down, never quite arriving, always somehow leaving. Claire came every weekend, 3 hours each way every single Saturday, her minivan on the gravel drive at 9:00 a.m., children Emma and Jake in the back seat, her arms full of groceries and library books, and whatever Eileen had asked for on the phone the Sunday before. Dorothy died holding Walter's hand on a Tuesday morning in November. The funeral was on Saturday. More than 200 people came to the Lutheran church on Main Street. Afterward, in the church parking lot, Walter saw Nathan standing beside a man in a suit who did not belong to anyone in that county. Heard Nathan say the words elevator valuation before he turned and walked back inside. In the fellowship hall, Sylvia sat at a table with her phone face down beside an untouched plate of food. Every few minutes, her hand drifted to the phone, turned it over, checked the screen, set it back down. Marcus found Walter near the coat rack, shuffled his feet and looked at the floor and asked quietly whether Dorothy's life insurance had been filed yet. Walter said he hadn't gotten to it. Marcus nodded and asked if there was a rough timeline. Claire found Walter in the kitchen, standing at the sink, not washing anything, just standing there with his hands flat on the counter and the water running. She walked up beside him and turned off the faucet. Then she took his hand. She didn't say a word. She stood beside him while the noise of the reception carried through the walls, and she held on until he was ready to go back out. That was what Walter saw at his wife's funeral. He did not forget it. The months that followed confirmed what the funeral had suggested. Fathan called in January, not to ask about Walter's sleep or his appetite or the silence that had settled into the farmhouse like a permanent winter. Nathan called to suggest selling the grain elevators. The market's good, Dad. I've run the numbers, you'd walk away clean. He emailed a spreadsheet Walter never opened. Sylvia missed Thanksgiving. She sent a text message the morning of something about a work deadline that couldn't shift. Walter read the message, put the phone on the counter, and ate a turkey breast alone at the kitchen table. Dorothy's chair sat across from him, pushed in neatly, the cushion still holding the impression of her weight. Marcus came in December, sat in the living room and talked about the weather, and a deer he'd nearly hit on the highway. After 22 minutes of this, he asked Walter for $14,000. The paint booth at the shop had failed. He'd pay it back by spring. Walter wrote the check because that was what Dorothy would have done. Marcus folded it into his shirt pocket and left without finishing his coffee. They're called every Sunday at 6 p.m. She asked about the garden, about his meals, about whether he'd been to church. She told him about Emma's spelling bee and Jake's new habit of naming every cat in the neighborhood. She never mentioned the will. She never asked about property or grain contracts or bank accounts. She asked if he was lonely. When Walter said he was fine, she said, "I don't believe you, Dad, but I love you anyway." By spring, Walter had written 4 checks to Marcus totaling $37,000. He had spoken to Nathan 7 times. Every conversation had been about money or property. Sylvia had called 3 times, all brief. Claire had visited 9 times and called every Sunday without exception. Walter started keeping a notebook, a small leather-bound book he bought at the hardware store for $4.29. He wrote down dates, who called, what they said, what they wanted. Wrote down the things they did not say. He did not plan to use the notebook for anything. He just needed proof that what he was seeing was real, because the silence between the visits was so loud, he sometimes wondered if he was imagining things. In April, while packing Dorothy's clothes into boxes for the church donation drive, he found her journal. It fell from the top shelf of her closet when he reached for a hat box. He caught it, sat on the edge of the bed, opened it to a random page. Dorothy had written in it for years. Some entries were about the farm, the weather, the price of seed corn. Others were about the children, their milestones, the small moments she wanted to remember. One entry, dated 4 years before her diagnosis, stopped Walter's hands from turning the page. She wrote, "A man's children will speak to him in whatever language he taught them." Walter never learned to say "I love you" without a check or a deed or a piece of equipment attached to it. Well, I've been telling him this for 30 years. He doesn't hear it, and now the children speak to him in transactions because transactions are the only conversation he ever held with them. Farm will outlast all of us. I just hope what comes after it is more than paperwork. Walter closed the journal, sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then he drove to town. George Hensley had handled the Callahan family's legal affairs since 1995. His office was on 2nd Street above the hardware store, and his desk was always buried under a system only he understood. Walter sat across from him the next morning and said, "I want to know which of my children would come to see me if I had nothing left to give them." George set down his pen. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Walter told him. "Redirect all farm income through a trust account George would control. With the equipment in Harold Briggs's barns across the country to house the out of the farmhouse and into the old single-wide trailer on the North 40, the one they'd used for seasonal workers in the 1990s. And call the children and tell them the farm had failed. Bad crop years, bad investments, debts he had been hiding." George studied him for a long time. "This is going to hurt people, Walter." "Probably. When they find out you lied, the anger will be real." "I know. But if none of them come when I have nothing, their anger won't matter much." George opened a legal pad and started writing. Harold Briggs came over on a Wednesday at the end of August and found Walter loading boxes into his truck. Harold was 70. A cattle rancher who had farmed the land beside Walter's for most of both their lives. His wife and Dorothy had been best friends. He had carried Dorothy's casket. "What on earth are you doing, Walt?" Walter told him. Harold leaned against the fence post with his arms crossed. Dorothy would have a great deal to say about this. Dorothy had a great deal to say about everything. She'd say you were being stubborn. She'd probably be right. Walter set a box in the truck bed. She also wrote in her journal that my children only talk to me in transactions. I need to know if she was right about that, too. Harold looked at the truck, then at the farmhouse, then back at Walter, with the expression of a man who has recognized a losing argument. He took the keys to the farm's second pickup and drove it to his own barn without another word. Walter moved into the trailer on September 2nd. It was 12 feet wide and 56 feet long, with wood-paneled walls and linoleum that curled at the edges near the bathroom door. Plumbing worked most of the time. The furnace ran when it felt like it. Walter brought Dorothy's photograph, her journal, her ceramic rooster from the desk, and enough clothes for the season. Left the farmhouse locked and dark. That evening, he sat on the trailer's fold-down step and made 4 phone calls. Nathan picked up on the second ring the sound of a city behind him. Walter gave him the story he had rehearsed with George. Bad investments, collapsed commodity prices, leveraged debt, everything gone. Living in the trailer on the North 40, Nathan was quiet for 4 seconds. And he said, "How could you let this get this far? I told you 3 years ago to diversify into commercial properties." You didn't listen. Walter said he hadn't. Nathan exhaled. "Is there anything left to salvage? Any equity in the land?" "Oh, I need to process this. I'll call you." He did not call for 11 days. Sylvia answered on the first ring between meetings. Walter kept it short. When he finished, the line went quiet for a moment, and then Sylvia said, "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry." Sympathy sounded genuine. "Then do you have a plan for what's next?" Walter said he was figuring it out. "Let me know if there's anything I can do." The call lasted 6 minutes. Marcus picked up with shop noise in the background. When Walter finished talking, Marcus's voice went thin and tight. "What about the money I lent you?" "I need that money, Dad." "Shop is barely," he stopped. Then the line went dead. Claire answered on the second ring. "Hi, Dad." Her voice was warm, unhurried. He told her everything he had told the others. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, the silence on the line was different from her siblings' silences. It was not calculating. It was not panicked. She was simply there, absorbing what her father had said. "Are you safe?" she asked. "I'm fine. Are you eating?" "Yes. I'm coming Saturday. Don't argue with me." Walter hung up. He opened his notebook to the first clean page and wrote 4 names in a column. Next to each name, he wrote what they had said. Nathan. "How could you let this happen?" Sylvia. "Do you have a plan?" Marcus. "What about the money, Claire? Are you safe?" He closed the notebook and set it beside Dorothy's photograph. Claire came that Saturday. Walter heard her minivan on the gravel before he saw it. The familiar sound of it, the slight rattle in the rear quarter panel Ben kept promising to fix. When he stepped outside, she was already pulling grocery bags from the back, and Emma was unbuckling Jake from his booster seat. "Dad," she hugged him on the trailer steps, both arms holding on. "You look thin. I'm fine. You're not fine. We're living in a trailer." She carried the groceries inside without waiting for an invitation: milk, bread, eggs, a rotisserie chicken, 2 cans of soup, a bag of apples, coffee. She opened the cabinets, saw how empty they were, and her face went still for half a second before she started putting things away. She did not comment on the size of the trailer or the water stain on the ceiling. She did not comment on anything. But Emma and Jake ran in the field behind the trailer, chasing late-season grasshoppers, their voices bright against the quiet farmland. Claire made sandwiches from the deli meat she'd brought, poured coffee from a thermos, and sat across from Walter at the narrow, fold-down table. "Tell me what happened," she said. He told her the version he had rehearsed: crop failures, bad investments, leveraged debt. Claire listened with her hands wrapped around the coffee cup, her eyes steady on his face. When he finished, she said, "What do you need?" She did not ask what he had lost. She asked what he needed. Walter wrote it in his notebook that evening after her taillights had disappeared down the gravel road. He underlined it twice. Nathan came on a Wednesday, 10 days after the phone call. His car was polished and clearly wrong for gravel roads. He stepped out wearing slacks and a button-down. Surveyed the trailer with the expression Walter recognized from the real estate developer he had spotted at Dorothy's funeral. Assessment, calculation. "You're really living here." It was not a question. "Come inside." Nathan stepped through the door and stopped. His eyes moved across the wood-paneled walls, the narrow kitchen, the fold-down bed at the far end. He did not sit. "Dad, this is... How did it get this bad?" Walter gave him the story. Nathan listened, standing up, arms crossed. "You should have diversified," Nathan said when Walter finished. "I told you 3 years ago that grain dependence was a structural risk. If you'd moved into commercial leasing on even a portion of the acreage, you'd have had a buffer." He paused. "Is there any equity left in the land, even at distressed sale prices?" "The bank has most of it." Nathan shook his head slowly. "I'll need to see the financials. If there's any way to restructure the debt before it goes further, we should look at it." "There's nothing to restructure." Nathan looked around the trailer once more. "Have you eaten? Let me take you to lunch." "Fine." "All right," he checked his watch. "Have to get back to Chicago tonight. I'll call you next week. We should talk about any remaining options on the property." He walked to his car, back down the gravel, and drove away. He did not look at the fields. He did not ask about the photograph of Dorothy on the counter. The entire visit had lasted 1 hour and 53 minutes, and the word sorry had not appeared once in it. Walter opened his notebook. Under Nathan's name, he wrote the date and 3 words: assess the damage. Harold came by that afternoon with a thermos of coffee and 2 mugs. Sat on the trailer step and looked out at the fields going gold in the fall light. "Nathan came," Walter said. "Saw his car on the county road, fancy thing. How'd it go? He told me I should have diversified." Harold poured coffee into both mugs. "Hard times don't change people. They just remove the cover." Walter drank his coffee. Wind moved through the soybeans. The silence had a weight to it, heavier than the absence of sound. It was the absence of interest. Sylvia called on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks later. Traffic in the background. "Dad, hi. I've been meaning to call." Her voice was brisk. "How are you doing? Getting by?" "Getting by, yes. Good. That's good." A pause. "Have you looked into any options for housing? There are some assisted living communities in Des Moines with reasonable rates. Nathan might be able to help with the costs." "I'm not moving to Des Moines." "Okay. Well, it's worth thinking about." She paused longer this time. "I'm sorry I haven't been able to come down. Work has been relentless, but I'm thinking about you. I appreciate that. I'll try to call again soon." The call lasted 7 minutes. Walter timed it on the clock above the trailer stove. He wrote, "Sylvia, October 19th, 7 minutes, suggested assisted living. Did not offer to visit." Marcus came in late October. He arrived without calling, his truck pulling into the gravel drive at 9:17 in the morning on a Saturday. Walter watched him through the trailer window. Marcus sat for a full minute before getting out, his hands gripping the steering wheel. When he finally stepped down, he was wearing the same Carhartt jacket he had worn for years, the one with grease on the cuffs and a torn pocket Carla kept saying she would fix. He knocked on the open door. "Come in," Walter said. Marcus stepped inside and looked around. His eyes moved differently than Nathan's had. If Nain had appraised. Marcus was inventorying. He was looking for something specific. "Sit down." Marcus sat at the fold-down table, picked at a scratch in the laminate with his thumbnail. I've been trying to figure out how to say this." "Say it. Did you have any other accounts? Anything the farm creditors might not know about? Savings bonds, CDs, anything Mom might have set aside separately?" "There's nothing." "What about the life insurance? Mom's policy? Where did that money go?" "Medical bills. 11 months of treatment took everything the insurance didn't cover." Brooks's jaw tightened. He stared at the scratch in the table. The shop is going under, Dad. I owe the bank $81,000. Carla took a second job waitressing because I can't make payroll. Tyler needs braces and I can't. I was counting on. Stopped. You were counting on the inheritance. Marcus looked up, and Walter saw it. Behind the anger, behind the desperation, there was fear. Raw and uncomplicated fear. Marcus was not a greedy man. He was a drowning one, and the inheritance had been the rope he had already mentally tied around himself. I don't know what to do, Marcus said quietly. Walter wanted to tell him the truth right then. Wanted to reach across the table and say the money is there. The farm is fine. Let me help you. Impulse rose in his chest and pressed hard against his ribs. But then he heard Dorothy's handwriting in his memory. Speak to him in transactions. He swallowed the words. I wish I could help, Walter said. Marcus nodded. He stood up, pushed back the chair, and walked to the door. I'll figure it out. Always do. But his voice said something else entirely. Walter watched Marcus's truck disappear down the county road and opened his notebook. Wrote for a long time. Marcus's name, the date, what he said, what his face looked like when he said it. Then at the bottom, he wrote, he did not ask how I was, but he is afraid, real fear. This is different from Nathan, who sat with the notebook open in his lap and felt something he had not expected to feel. Guilt. November came. Corn went to the elevator, same as every year, but Walter's name was nowhere on the paperwork. Harold's crew ran the harvest with quiet efficiency. Money flowed into George's trust account like water into a locked cistern. Nathan called once in November to ask if Walter had explored the mineral rights. When Walter said there were nothing worth exploring, Nathan said, "That's a shame," and the call ended. Sylvia did not call at all. Marcus did not come back. Carla called Claire in early November, her voice careful and thin, asking if Claire had heard from her father-in-law. Claire told her she had, that she came every Saturday. Carla said Marcus wouldn't talk about the trailer visit, that he had come home and sat in the garage for 3 hours without starting any work. She was worried about him. But Claire came. Every Saturday without exception. Her minivan appeared on the gravel drive between 9 and 9:30 in the morning, and she came with groceries packed in reusable bags from the Hy-Vee in Cedar Falls. She came with Emma and Jake, who had started treating the trailer like an adventure. Jake called it Grandpa's camping house. Emma asked why there was no television. Each visit had a rhythm. Claire arrived, checked the pantry, put the groceries away. She walked through the trailer looking for things that needed attention. A loose cabinet hinge, a dripping faucet, the window latch that didn't close all the way. She brought tools in a canvas bag from Ben's garage and fixed things quietly, without fanfare, the way someone tends a garden. Third Saturday in November, Claire brought a casserole in a covered dish and a set of curtains she had sewn during the week. The curtains were a deep green cotton, simple and heavy enough to hold out the cold. She hung them on a tension rod over the trailer's main window while Walter sat at the table and watched. "You have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "The trailer gets cold at night. Curtains help." She adjusted the hem, stepped back, decided it was even. Mom used to say a home isn't warm because of the furnace. It's warm because someone cared enough to make it that way. Walter looked at the green curtains. They changed the room. Dramatically, not in any way a photograph would capture, but the trailer felt less temporary with them there, less abandoned, cold. That evening after she had cooked Dorothy's recipe for chicken and rice, the one with the cream of mushroom soup all 4 children had grown up eating, Claire put Emma and Jake to bed in the fold-down back of the trailer, tucked them in with sleeping bags and read them one story each, but then came back to the front and poured 2 cups of coffee. "Don't have to explain anything," she said. "I don't need to understand what happened with the money or the elevators. I just need to know you're eating, that you're not sitting here alone every night, talking to Mom's photograph." Walter glanced at Dorothy's photograph on the counter. "I talk to her sometimes. That's okay. She probably talks back." The laugh surprised came out rough and unpracticed. Claire smiled at the sound of it. "Come live with us," she said. "Ben and I talked about it. We can set up the back bedroom. With Emma and Jake would love having you there." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because this is where I belong. This land, whatever's left of it." Claire studied him. "Okay," she said. "Then I'll keep coming." "Dad, the drive is 3 hours round trip. You're spending money on groceries. Don't tell me what I can afford." She left at 9:45 p.m. carrying Jake to the car while Emma walked ahead with a flashlight Ben had given her. Walter stood on the trailer step and watched Claire buckle the children in, watched her pause at the driver's door and look back at him. She raised one hand, he raised his. The taillights moved down the gravel road, turned onto the county blacktop, and disappeared. Walter went inside. The tray smelled like chicken and rice and coffee and the faint sweetness of Jake's shampoo. He opened his notebook and sat for a long time before writing. Their November 23rd, 5th visit. Brought curtains she sewed herself. Cooked Dorothy's recipe. Asked me to come live with them. I said no. She said she would keep coming anyway. She drove 3 hours today and spent money she doesn't have. She never asked for anything, not once. Not about the will, the property, the bank accounts. She asked if I was eating. She asked if I was lonely. She fixed the cabinet hinge. He set the pen down and looked at the 4 columns of names in his notebook. 3 columns had 2 or 3 entries each. Claire's column was filling the pages. December arrived with a cold snap that frosted the trailer windows from the inside. Walter woke each morning to fern-shaped ice crystals on the glass that caught the early light and melted by noon. Furnace ran constantly, rattling in its housing like something trying to escape. The propane bill climbed in a way that was almost funny, given that the man paying it could have heated a mansion on the south side of Des Moines without noticing the cost. Claire did not miss a Saturday. She brought heavier groceries as the cold settled in. Beef stew with thick broth and good potatoes. Things that could simmer on the stove and fill the trailer with warmth. She brought a second space heater from Ben's garage. She brought the children's drawings, which she taped to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets. The trailer was accumulating evidence of her presence. Green curtains, a crocheted blanket on the couch, a jar of dried winter berries she had found along the road and arranged in a glass on the windowsill. Harold came by on a Wednesday in mid-December, stomping snow from his boots. He brought a pound of bacon from his own freezer and a look on his face that meant he had something to say. Sat at the table with coffee. Harold ate a strip of cold bacon the way he had since they were young men working the fence line between their properties. How long are you planning to keep this up, Walt? As long as it takes. As long as what takes? Harold set down his mug. You've been in this trailer 3 months. You've got your answer. Nathan came and counted the silverware. Sylvia called twice. Marcus asked for his money. Claire shows up every week with groceries and curtains. What else do you need to see? I need to know it holds, Walter said. I need to know she keeps coming when the roads are bad and the cold is real and she's got her own family to feed. I need to know her love doesn't have a bottom. Harold looked at him for a long time. Are you testing them or punishing them? Walter didn't answer. Harold pulled on his hat. That question stayed in the trailer like a third person after he left. Christmas came. Claire drove down on Christmas Eve with Ben and the children. They brought a ham and a pecan pie and a small artificial tree they sets up on the kitchen counter and strung with battery-powered lights. Ben shook Walter's hand and called him sir the way he always had, and then, without being asked, crawled under the trailer to check the insulation on the pipes. Ate dinner crowded around the fold-down table. Emma sang a Christmas carol she had learned at school, off-key and earnest. Jake fell asleep in Ben's lap halfway through dessert. Claire washed the dishes while Walter dried, standing side by side at the narrow sink without talking, the way he and Dorothy had stood after harvest suppers when the house had been full of neighbors and the quiet of cleanup felt like a reward. Before they left, Claire handed Walter a wrapped package. Inside was a framed photograph he had never seen. Dorothy and Claire standing in the vegetable garden behind the farmhouse, Dorothy's arm around her daughter's shoulders, the light golden in late summer. Dorothy laughing at something Claire had just said. Found it on Mom's phone, Claire said. I thought you should have it. Walter held the photograph and did not speak. Nathan did not call on Christmas. Sylvia sent a card that arrived on December 29th. Marcus called Christmas morning, but the conversation lasted 4 minutes and consisted mostly of silence. He said Merry Christmas and hung up. January was bitter. The cold settled into the Iowa flatlands with a permanence that felt personal. Walter wore 2 flannel shirts under a vest inside the trailer and still woke shivering at 4 a.m. when the furnace cycled off. 71 years old. His knees ached when he rose in the morning. His shoulders were stiff from the fold-down mattress. One morning in late January, he woke coughing and could not stop. The cough deepened over 3 days. By the 4th day, his chest felt weighted, and his breath came in shallow pulls that did not satisfy. He called Claire on Sunday evening at 6 p.m., not to ask for help just because it was Sunday and she always called. But his voice was different, and Claire heard it immediately. How long have you been coughing like that? Few days. Have you seen anyone? It's just a cold, Dad. Her voice carried the patience running out. I'll be there tomorrow morning. She arrived at 7:52 a.m. She took one look at him, put her hand on his forehead, and drove him to the clinic in town without asking his opinion about it. Pneumonia. The doctor wanted to admit him to the hospital in Des Moines. Walter refused. Claire argued with him in the parking lot for 11 minutes, their breath in white clouds, until they reached a compromise. She would stay with him at the trailer and make sure he took the antibiotics and rested and kept fluid down. She called Ben from the trailer kitchen. "I'm staying for a few days. Can you handle the kids?" Ben said he could. She called the school and arranged a substitute. She did not mention the unpaid leave. For 4 days, Claire slept on the trailer couch and woke every 6 hours to make sure Walter took his medication. She made broth from chicken bones she found in his freezer. She boiled water in a pot and held it near him when the cough was worst at night and the steam helped. Second day, Ben drove out with a load of rigid foam insulation and spent the afternoon sealing the gaps along the trailer's bottom edge where the cold air crept in. Worked silently, methodical, and unhurried, and when he finished, he came inside and sat with Walter for an hour and talked about truck engines while Claire graded spelling tests at the fold-down table. On the third evening, Walter's fever broke. He sat up and looked at Claire, who was reading in the dim circle of the lamp she had brought from home. "Thank you," he said. She looked up. "For what?" "For staying. You're my dad." "Nothing else." She closed her book and looked at him across the narrow space. "Nothing else," she agreed. On the fourth morning, while Claire was in the shower, Walter's phone rang. It was Nathan. "Dad, I heard from a colleague that Summit Development is buying agricultural parcels in this county. They're paying above market. If you still hold any acreage free and clear, even the North 40 where you're living, we should get ahead of this." "I can make a call this week." Walter coughed. "I don't have anything to sell, Nathan. Are you sure? Even the section you're living on. If you own that parcel, you could negotiate a leaseback arrangement, and I'm sick, Nathan." A pause. "Sick? Pneumonia. Oh." Another pause. "Are you being treated? Claire's here. She's been here 4 days. Good, that's good." Nathan cleared his throat. "Well, think about the Summit thing. Those offers close fast. I'll email you the contact." He hung up. Walter sat with the phone in his hand. Sathan had heard of bacon. Nathan had heard about a land deal before he heard about his illness. The information had traveled through a business contact, not through family. Claire was sleeping on a couch 4 feet away, and Nathan was sending emails about acreage. Walter opened the notebook. Under Nathan's name he wrote, "Called about land deal. Learned about pneumonia mid-conversation. Did not offer to come." That night, after Claire had fallen asleep, Walter took Dorothy's journal from the shelf and turned to entries he hadn't read yet. Had been rationing them, reading a few pages at a time, afraid of running out of her voice. The entry he found was dated 5 years before her diagnosis. Walter built the first barn from nothing and built it again after the fire in 1994. He held Nathan all night when he had croup at age 3. He drove 4 hours in a blizzard to get Marcus from that party in Ames when Marcus was 19. But he never once told Nathan he was proud of him for leaving and building something on his own. He never came to Marcus's Little League games. He never called Sylvia at college unless there was a bill to discuss. He loves them, I know he does, but he loves them the way the ground loves rain, silently from underneath in ways they can't see. Its children need to see it. Walter closed the journal. He sat in the dark trailer and listened to Claire breathing on the couch and felt the full weight of what Dorothy had written settle down onto him. The test he was running on his children was not the only test in this trailer. Dorothy was running one on him from the grave, through the pages of her journal. She was asking him to look at what he had built beyond the farm, to look at the distances between himself and his children, and ask how many of those distances he had paved himself. Sathan spoke in transactions because Walter had taught him that language. Sylvia disappeared into her career because Walter had modeled that work was the most important thing a person could do. Marcus came only when he needed money because Walter had never offered anything else. Claire was different, but Claire had been raised, mostly by Dorothy. February passed slowly. March came and the fields turned to mud and then to the first green of the new season. Walter recovered from the pneumonia, but the cold had left something in his joints, and on bad mornings it took him 10 minutes to straighten his back after getting out of bed. Marcus did not call. Carla called Claire twice. The shop had closed in February. Marcus was working part-time at an auto parts retailer in Ames, making $13.50 an hour. Carla's voice was careful on the phone, the voice of a woman holding a household together by will alone. Claire drove to Ames on a Sunday in March. She found Marcus in the garage behind his house, sitting in a folding chair, staring at an engine he didn't have parts to rebuild. She brought groceries. He told her to leave. She set the bags on the kitchen counter and talked to Carla for an hour while Marcus stayed in the garage. When she left, the groceries were still on the counter. The next day, Carla texted her. He ate the soup. "Thank you." Sylvia called in April. 6 minutes. She had a new project at work and asked about Walter late in the conversation, after she had told him about the project, and the question had the feel of something remembered rather than meant. Spring warmed into early summer. The corn was planted and the beans were in, and the elevators hummed with grain from the previous year's reserves. Harold ran the operation with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been doing this work his whole life. Nobody outside the arrangement knew the farm was anything other than what it appeared to be on the surface. One Saturday evening in late May, Claire and Walter sat on the trailer step, watching the sun go down over the fields. Emma and Jake were asleep inside. The air smelled of turned soil and new growth, and the light was the color that comes to Iowa in late spring when the sun takes its time going. What did Mom used to say about this place? Claire asked. Walter thought. She said the land would outlast all of us, so we'd better make sure we deserved it. Claire was quiet. Do you miss her every hour of every day? She'd want you inside, out of this trailer. Back in the house, Walter looked at the fields. The corn was knee-high already, green rows running straight to the horizon. Grain elevators stood against the sky, solid and familiar. Everything he owned, everything he had pretended to lose. I think it might be time, he said. Claire looked at him. Time for what? Time to stop this. She didn't ask what he meant. She waited. I need to bring them all here, Walter said. All 4 of you. I need to tell you the truth. Claire set down her coffee. What? Truth, Dad? Walter shook his head. Saturday, next Saturday. Can you come and ask Nathan and Sylvia and Marcus? She studied his face in the failing light. Whatever she saw there made her nod without pressing further. I'll make the calls, she said. She left that night with the children asleep in the back seat. Walter sat on the trailer step long after her taillights had vanished. He opened his notebook to the first page, where he had written the 4 names in their first responses 9 months ago. He turned through the pages. Nathan's column had 5 entries, all about money or property. Sylvia's column had 3 entries, all brief, all distant. Marcus's column had 2 entries, both painful. Claire's column filled 39 pages. He closed the notebook. The crickets were loud in the grass. Stars were out. Somewhere in the farmhouse, Dorothy's journal waited in a drawer, her handwriting patient. Walter picked up his phone and dialed George Hensley's home number. George answered on the 4th ring. It's time, Walter said. Set up the family meeting. I'm ending this. Claire made the calls on Monday. She told Walter about each one that evening on the phone. Nathan had asked immediately whether the meeting was about the property. Claire told him she didn't know, only that their father wanted all four of them there Saturday morning. Nathan said he would try. Claire told him trying wasn't the same as coming. He said he would be there. Sylvia hesitated. She had a conference call scheduled. Would they do Sunday? Claire said Saturday at 10 a.m. Sylvia said she would move the call. Marcus picked up but didn't speak for several seconds. Claire could hear the parts store in the background. What is this about? He asked. He wants to see us. All of us. Fine, I'll be there. Saturday came with clear skies and a warm south wind. June in Iowa, the fields impossibly green, the air thick with the smell of growing things. Walter woke early and dressed in clean clothes for the first time in months. He shaved at the trailer's small mirror and polished his boots and combed his hair. Harold had spent 3 days airing out the farmhouse, wiping down surfaces, mopping the kitchen floor. He had set out mugs and a coffee pot and arranged the farm's financial statements on the dining table. It was 9 months of hidden prosperity laid out in black and white. You sure about this? Harold asked. It's honest, Walter said. At least that much. Claire arrived first. She always arrived first. Her minivan pulled into the farmhouse drive at 9:28 a.m. Emma and Jake tumbled out and ran toward Harold, who'd scooped Jake up with one arm and ruffled Emma's hair. Ben climbed out of the passenger side, stretched and nodded to Walter on the porch. Claire walked up the steps and stopped. She looked at the farmhouse door, opened for the first time in 9 months, and then at Walter. Something moved across her face. A question forming, then held back. She went inside. Nathan arrived at 9:51 a.m., his car polished and wrong for gravel roads. He stepped out, straightening his collar, scanned the prop, straightening his collar with the same appraising look he had worn at his one trailer visit. Behind him, a second car pulled in. Sylvia's rental, silver and anonymous. She stepped out in pressed slacks and sunglasses and stood beside Nathan without speaking. Marcus came last. His truck rattled up the drive at 10:03, and he parked at an angle behind Sylvia's rental. He sat in the cab for a full minute, engine off, hands on the wheel. Carla was not with him. When he stepped down, he walked with his head down. They gathered in the farmhouse kitchen. Walter had not been in this room for 9 months, and the familiarity of it pressed against his chest. Dorothy's countertops, Dorothy's curtains, the hook by the door where she used to hang her apron. Harold poured coffee and stepped outside with Ben and the children. 5 Callahan stood in the kitchen where all 4 children had eaten breakfast before school, where Dorothy had packed lunches and argued with teenagers and taught Claire to bake bread on Saturday mornings. Nathan leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. Sylvia sat at the table with her back straight and her hands folded. Marcus stood near the door, separate, his eyes on the floor. Claire sat at the table across from Sylvia. Walter stood at the head. Farm did not go bankrupt, he said. The room went still in a way that felt physical. The grain elevators are running. The contracts are current. The portfolio is intact. I lied to all of you. Nathan's face went white, then red. Lied, I lied. About everything, the bankruptcy, the debt, the foreclosure, all of it. Sylvia's hands pressed harder into each other on the table. Marcus looked up from the floor. His jaw was tight. I lied because your mother had been dead for 14 months, and in those months I learned something about my children that I did not want to believe. I tested it. You tested us. Nathan's voice was even, the voice he used in negotiations, but the steel under it was audible. I told each of you I had lost everything, and then I waited to see what you would do. Walter picked up the notebook. He had carried it for 9 months. The leather was worn at the corners. Nathan. He opened to the first section. You came once. November 12th. You drove from Chicago and walked the property and assessed the acreage and asked about equity in the land and told me I should have diversified. Left in under 2 hours. You called 5 more times. Every call was about money or property. The day you learned I had pneumonia, you learned about it mid-conversation while asking about a land development deal. You did not offer to come. Nathan's face was rigid. He stared at the wall behind Walter's head. Sylvia. Walter turned the pages. You called 3 times in 9 months, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and 5 minutes. You suggested assisted living. You sent a Christmas card that arrived 5 days late. You did not visit once. The flush crept up Sylvia's neck. Her eyes stayed on her folded hands. Marcus. Walter's voice softened because Marcus's section was the one that hurt him most to read. You came once. You asked about hidden accounts, savings bonds, insurance money. When I told you there was nothing, you left. You did not call on Christmas. You did not call when I was sick. Carla called Claire, but you did not call. Marcus's chin dropped to his chest. Claire. Walter closed the notebook. He did not need it for this part. Claire drove 3 hours every Saturday for 9 months. She brought groceries on a teacher's salary. She sewed curtains at her kitchen table and brought them to a trailer. She fixed the steps and the hinges and the faucet and the window latch. When I got pneumonia in January, she took unpaid leave from her classroom and slept on my couch for 4 nights. Her husband drove out to insulate the trailer. She cooked your mother's recipes. She taped the children's drawings to the refrigerator. She asked me to come live with her family. She never asked about money. She never asked about the will. She never asked about the property. She asked if I was eating. She asked if I was lonely. The kitchen was quiet. Sighed. Emma's laugh carried through the open window. Nathan spoke first. You manipulated us. The control was gone from his voice now. You sat in that trailer for 9 months and watched us, stopped us like we were subjects in some experiment. I sat in that trailer for 9 months because I needed to know whether my children loved me. That is not how you find out if someone loves you. You don't lie to your family and keep a scorecard. Right, but I didn't know another way. Your mother used to do this for me. She knew who was struggling, who needed a call, who needed someone to show up. Without her, I couldn't see anymore. I couldn't tell if you were coming to see me or coming to see what I could give you. That's not fair, Sylvia said. Her voice was quiet, almost flat. I had obligations. You can't measure love by how many times someone makes a 3-hour drive. I measured it by whether anyone made the drive at all. Sylvia looked away. Marcus spoke without raising his head. Words came out cracked, dragged up from somewhere deep. I was ashamed. Every time I came to see you, I needed something. Money for the shop, money for the mortgage, money for Tyler's braces. I didn't know how to just come and be there without a reason attached to it. I didn't know how to show up without asking for something. He raised his head. His eyes were red. The shop went under in February. We're stocking shelves at $13.50 an hour. Carla's working 2 jobs. I couldn't come sit in your trailer and pretend everything was fine when my whole life was coming apart. You would have told me that, Walter said. I was ashamed, Marcus repeated. His voice broke on the word. The room held the sound. Odie filled the silence. Walter felt it settle, and underneath it, he felt something else. The recognition that Marcus's shame and his own stubbornness were closer to each other than he wanted to admit. Both men had chosen distance over honesty. Both had thought the other man couldn't handle the truth. Nathan pushed off the counter. This is unbelievable. You had the money the whole time. Marcus lost his business, his income, his savings, and you sat there with a trust account full of money and watched it happen. That's Marcus. Claire's voice was quiet, but it stopped Nathan. She spoke the single word and nothing else, and Nathan went silent. Right, Walter said. He's right about Marcus. I watched it happen and I chose not to help, and that is on me. Anne spoke again. Sylvia, I told myself I would visit when things slowed down. I always told myself that things never slowed down. They never will. She paused. That's not your fault, Dad. That's mine. I could have come. I chose not to. Admission sat in the room, plain and unadorned. Nathan said nothing. He stood against the counter, staring at the financial documents on the table. A strip of bait cold. The proof of everything he had been told was gone. Claire stood and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where the children were playing with Harold. Her back was to the room. Did you test me too, Dad? Walter felt the question land. Did you sit there every Saturday writing in that notebook, keeping score of what I brought and what I fixed and how long I stayed? Did you wonder if I was real? No. Then why's my name fill 39 pages? Because I needed a record of what love looks like. Her mother is gone, and I needed proof that someone still knew how to do this, that I hadn't failed all four of you completely. Claire turned from the window. Her eyes were bright. I didn't pass any test, Dad. I just showed up. That's all I did. I showed up because you're my father, and you were alone and cold, and I couldn't sleep on Saturday nights knowing I hadn't come to see you that morning. There is no score for that. There is no notebook entry that captures it. I know, do you? I'm learning. Claire looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at her three siblings, each one carrying their own version of the distance the family had built across decades. Nathan with his armor of ambition, Sylvia with her habit of postponement, Marcus with his shame, none of them villains. But none of them saints. Just four people who had lost their mother and never learned how to love their father without her translating between them. We all failed, Claire said. Not just them, all of us. We let Mom carry everything, and when she died, we didn't know how to carry each other. She turned back to Walter. You're not innocent in this either, Dad. You never went to Marcus's baseball games. You never called Sylvia at college. You never told Nathan you were proud of him. Mom wrote about it in her journal. She told me about it before she died. She said if anything happened to her, this family would part because you would go back into the farm and the rest of them would drift away. She was right. The kitchen was quiet. 5 people standing in the room where they had once been a family, looking at what they had become without the woman who held them together. Walter sat down heavily in Eileen's chair at the head of the table. He put his hands flat on the surface and looked at his children. Her mother was right about me. I built this farm, and I thought that was enough. I thought that was the whole of it. She strip of bacon cold. She spent 31 years trying to teach me the difference between providing and loving, and I didn't understand it until I read it in her journal after she was already gone. Marcus wiped his face. Sylvia pressed her fingers to her eyes. Nathan had not moved, but his jaw was working, holding back something he was not ready to release yet. I'm sorry, Walter said. For the test and the lies. For the years before the test when I let your mother do all the loving while I did the work. Sorry for the games I missed, Marcus. For the calls I didn't make, Sylvia. For never telling you I was proud of you, Nathan. I was. I am. I just didn't know how to say it. Claire crossed the kitchen and sat in the chair beside Walter. She put her hand on his arm. She didn't say it was all right, because it wasn't entirely all right. Her hand on his arm said she was still there. Marcus moved next. He crossed the kitchen and sat at the table. His elbows on the surface and covered his face. His shoulders shook once, then steadied. Sylvia sat down slowly, pulling her chair close, placing her hands on the table. Nathan was last. He stood alone against the counter for a full minute, weighing his anger, deciding what to do with it. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down. Nobody spoke for a while. The 5 of them sat in Dorothy's kitchen, in the chairs they had sat in as children, and the silence was different now. It was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of people who had run out of defenses and were sitting quietly with what remained. There are things I need to tell you about the will and the farm, Walter said. But not today. Today I just needed you here. All of you. Outside the window, Jake's voice carried across the yard. Grandpa. Emma found a frog. Claire squeezed Walter's arm and stood and walked out the kitchen door into the sunlight. Walter sat at the table with Nathan, Sylvia, and Marcus. The coffee was cold. The financial documents lay untouched. Marcus's hands were still over his face. Sylvia was looking at the window where Dorothy's curtains hung, the ones she had picked from a catalog 28 years ago. Nathan reached across the table and picked up the notebook. He turned to his own section and read it. Every entry, every date, every word that cataloged the distance between a father and his eldest son, When he finished, he set the notebook down carefully and pushed it back across the table. "Should have just talked to us," Nathan said. But the anger was gone from his voice. What had replaced it was quieter and more honest. And it sounded, if Walter was hearing it correctly, like grief. He stayed for lunch. Nobody planned it. Harold came inside with the children and looked at the 5 Kellahans around the table and said, "I'll put something together," and that was that. He moved through Dorothy's kitchen with the ease of a man who had eaten 1,000 meals there. He set plates down without asking who wanted what. Emma climbed into Walter's lap. Jake sat on the floor with a toy truck from Ben's car. At 2 p.m., Nathan said he needed to get back. Sylvia stood too. They walked to their cars together. Kevin left last, his truck idling for a full minute in the drive before he put it in gear. Walter corrected himself. Marcus left last. Through the windshield, Walter could see his face. Marcus lifted one hand, Walter lifted his. Claire stayed. She always stayed. That evening, after Ben had taken the children out to the yard to look for fireflies in the new dark, Claire and Walter sat on the farmhouse porch. The air was warm and the light had gone soft in that way Iowa June evenings earned, the sun taking its time going down below the corn. "I have something for you," Walter said. He went inside and came back carrying a wooden box. Dorothy's recipe box, the one she had kept in the corner of her kitchen desk beside the ceramic rooster. Set it in Claire's lap. Claire opened it, index cards in Dorothy's handwriting organized by category with tabs cut from manila folders. Pot roast, chicken and rice, pecan pie, cinnamon rolls, decades of meals written in pencil and ink, some cards spattered with grease, some rewritten when the originals wore through. Claire turned through the cards slowly. Near the back, behind the desserts, she found an envelope with her name on it in Dorothy's handwriting. She looked at Walter. "I didn't put it there," he said. "She must have before she got sick." Claire opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, folded twice. She read it silently. Her face changed as her eyes moved down the page. The change was private, the way a person's face changes when they hear something they have been waiting their whole life to hear. When she finished, she folded the letter and held it against her chest. "What did she say?" Walter asked. Claire shook her head. "It's between me and Mom." She paused. "But I'll tell this much." She looked at Walter in the porch light, her mother's daughter, sitting in the house her mother had lived in. "She said she wasn't worried about me. She said she was worried about you." Walter leaned back in his chair. Wood creaked. The crickets were starting up in the grass. She was usually right about things. She usually was. The following week, George Hensley drove out from town with a briefcase and a stack of documents. He sat at the dining table across from Walter, clicked his pen, and opened the file. "Sure about this?" George asked. Walter was sure. The will was structured with one guiding principle: the farm, all 600 acres, and the 3 renovators and the operational equipment would go into a family trust with Claire as the primary steward. She would manage the land, the operations, the daily decisions. The trust was not hers alone. It belonged to all the grandchildren equally, Nathan's 2 Marxist Tyler and Claire's Emma and Jake and any who came later. Claire would manage it because she had been the one who showed up. Nathan, Sylvia, and Marcus would each receive equal shares of the investment portfolio, with conditions, no penalties, no punitive clauses designed to punish them for failing the test. Harold had talked Walter out of that version. "Already put them through one test, Walter. Don't make the rest of their lives a test, too." Walter added one thing to the will that was not a financial provision. A request written in his own hand attached to the trust documents by George as a letter of wishes. "Sunday dinner at the farmhouse. First Sunday of every month, come because you want to. The table is big enough." The first Sunday dinner was in July. Claire drove down Saturday afternoon and spent the evening cooking, filling the farmhouse with smells that had lived there when Dorothy was alive. A pot roast with onions and carrots, mashed potatoes from the garden. Harold had kept it going. She set the table with Dorothy's good dishes, the ones with the blue rim that had been a wedding gift from Dorothy's mother. Marcus came first. He arrived alone. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his hands in his pockets, the same posture he had carried into the trailer visit 8 months earlier. Something was different about him. He was clean-shaved. He was wearing a collared shirt. "Can I help?" he asked. Claire handed him a peeler and a bag of potatoes. He sat at the counter and peeled in silence. Walter watched from the doorway of the living room and felt something in his chest loosen. Sylvia drove down from Minneapolis. She arrived in the early afternoon carrying a bottle of wine and a bakery pie she admitted she had not made herself. Sent her for it. She set it on the counter and stood in Dorothy's kitchen looking uncertain, as if she had forgotten the rhythm of being in this house without a reason to leave. "Come sit," Claire said, and Sylvia sat, and the three of them peeled and chopped and talked about nothing important, and the house filled with the low hum of people being a family. Nathan was last. He pulled into the driveway at 4 p.m., his wife beside him, their two college-age kids in the back seat. They had not been to this farmhouse since Dorothy's funeral. Nathan walked up the porch steps slowly, pausing at the door the way a man pauses at a threshold he is not sure he has earned. Walter met him there. He held out his hand. Nathan took it, and the handshake lasted longer than a greeting. Nathan's fingers tightened around his father's. Neither of them spoke. Nathan walked inside. Dinner was crowded and imperfect. The table wasn't big enough, so Ben set up a folding table beside it and covered it with a tablecloth. The chairs didn't match. Jake knocked over his milk. Emma dropped her fork twice. Harold sat at the far end eating pot roast and saying nothing, content. Walter sat at the head of the table. Dorothy's chair. He had moved it to the head position that morning, replacing his own, because Dorothy had always sat at the center of things, and now it was his turn to try. He looked down the length of the mismatched tables at his family. Nathan was talking to Ben about trucks, neither of them especially qualified to hold the conversation, but both committed to it. Sylvia was asking Emma about school, genuinely leaning forward, listening. Marcus was cutting Jake's pot roast into small pieces with the concentration of a man who wanted to get one thing exactly right today. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder, watching the same scene Walter was watching. When their eyes met, she smiled. Not the smile of someone relieved that something terrible had been survived, the smile of someone who is exactly where she belongs. After dinner, the grandchildren scattered to the yard. Nathan and Marcus washed dishes together at the sink. Marcus washed and Nathan dried, the rhythm steady and mechanical, and Walter understood that this was how it would begin. It was not with speeches, with shared labor, with standing next to each other and doing something ordinary. Kevin found Walter on the porch after the dishes were done. Sickos? Walter reminded himself. Old habits. Marcus sat on the step below Walter's chair the way he used to when he was a boy, back when Walter would sit out here after supper and Marcus would bring a glass of lemonade and they would listen to the evening settle in. "I talked to Harold," Marcus said. "He could use help with the cattle operation through fall. And if you'd let me work the elevators, learn that side of it, I think I could. Want to come back to farming? I want to come back to something." Walter put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Heavy and deliberate, Marcus reached up and covered it with his own. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. The house emptied slowly. Sylvia left at 7. Nathan and his family stayed until 8:30, his wife hugging Claire in the driveway, promising to bring something next time. Marcus was last to leave. He shook Walter's hand at the door. "Thank you for today. It's just dinner. You know, it's not just dinner." Walter watched Marcus's taillights move down the gravel and turn onto the county road. Then the farmhouse was quiet, the good kind, the kind that comes after a room has been full of people and their warmth is still in the walls. Claire and Ben had put the children to bed upstairs in the small bedroom that had been Claire's when she was a girl. Walter could hear the floorboards creak as she moved through the room, settling Emma, reading to Jake, her footsteps following the same path Dorothy's had followed a generation before. Walter walked out to the porch. The night was warm. The grain elevators stood against the last blue of the sky, tall and solid. The field stretched out in every direction, dark now, the corn invisible but present, growing in the dark the way things grow when no one is watching. He touched the wedding ring on the chain that was around his neck. He had worn it there since the funeral, the simple gold band Dorothy had placed on his finger in the Methodist church in June of 1992. It was warm from his skin. "You would have been furious with me," he said quietly, to the night air, to the land, to whatever part of Dorothy was still listening. Moving into that trailer, lying to the children, keeping that notebook. He rubbed the ring between his thumb and forefinger. "But you would have come to the table. You always did. And you would have forgiven me eventually because you always did that too." From inside the house he heard Claire laugh at something Ben said. Then Jake's voice, sleepy and insistent, asking for water. The screen door opened behind him. Emma padded out in bare feet, squinting against the porch light. "Grandpa, are you coming inside?" Walter looked at her. 7 years old. Dorothy's eyes, Claire's stubbornness, standing in the doorway of the house he had built with her grandmother 30 years ago. "I'm coming," he said. He took one last look at the land, at the elevators, at the sky going dark above the fields. And he turned away from the porch and walked inside, into the warmth, into the light, into the house where someone was waiting for him. For the first time in almost 2 years, the house did not feel empty. If you made it to the end of Walter's story, hit subscribe. Because the lesson here is not just about inheritance or money or who gets what when a parent is gone. The lesson is simpler and harder than any of that. It is about the difference between being present and being available. It is about the difference between love that shows up and love that means to. It is about what remains of a family when you remove everything a family can be given, and what remains when you remove the woman who held them together, and what remains when you strip away every excuse and every reason and every comfortable distance. Walter Callahan spent 9 months in a trailer testing his children, but Dorothy Callahan spent 31 years asking her husband to see them. It took losing her to make him finally look. Like this video if you believe that showing up is the most underrated act of love. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Who in your life showed up for you when it cost them something? Tell me their name. They deserve to be remembered.